Welcome to the Connor's Corner segment of Ask the Lawyer. With me right now is William Wellman, an actor. And his father was a fairly famous director. In fact, probably one of the most famous directors of all time. How you doing today, sir?
I'm doing great, Mike. How are you?
Okay, Sal, I'm doing pretty good, but some of our younger people in the audience may not remember your father. Can you give them a brief overview?
Well, I can tell you this. My father's most well-known films, starting with Wings, which was the winner of the very first Academy Award for Best Picture. Wings was made in 1927. The first Academy Awards were 1929. Some of his films that are most well-known include Public Enemy with James Cagney, Call of the Wild with Clark Gable and Loretta Young, A Star is Born, the original, which my father won an Oscar for writing, Nothing Sacred, Carole Lombard, Roxy Hart, Ginger Rogers.
Which a lot of people may know was the basis for Chicago.
Yeah, that's true. And his westerns, Oxbow Incident, Yellow Sky, Westward the Women are three really highly touted westerns. And then war films like The Story of G.I. Joe and Battleground. He did 11 aviation films, starting with Wings. And one of the most successful ones was The High and the Mighty with John Wayne.
Your father had a background in aviation.
Yes, he did. He was a fighter pilot in the First World War. He had 6 major air crashes. He lasted 4 months in combat, where in those days a pilot lasted 2 to 4 weeks. So my father lasted 4 months before he was shot down by anti-aircraft fire and sent home.
How does he get into Hollywood from there?
Well, he met a movie star, Helene Chadwick, at the Dell, the famous Dell in San Diego. And he ended up marrying her. And he had met Douglas Fairbanks when he was playing ice hockey. After he got kicked out of high school, he was playing professional ice hockey in Boston, in the Boston arena. And Douglas Fairbanks was a star of stage at the time and doing a play in Boston. And they became friends. Fairbanks came and watched the ice hockey and had my father come backstage to meet everybody that was involved in the play. And Fairbanks told my father, if you ever need a job, come out to Hollywood and look me up. So after the war was over, my father didn't know what he was going to do with the rest of his life, and he remembered what Fairbanks had said, and he got in his SPAD aircraft. He was a flight instructor in Rockwell Field, San Diego, towards the end of the war. And my father flew up and landed on the polo field in front of Douglas Fairbanks and Mary Pickford and a huge Hollywood crowd. Norma Talmadge and Charlie Chaplin and all the greats were there. And he marched up to Fairbanks. He said, Mr. Fairbanks, do you remember me? And Fairbanks says, I remember you. You're Wild Bill. Can you ride a horse? And my father said, well, I've ridden everything else I could learn. And Fairbanks gave him the young lead in his next picture, which was a Western called The Knickerbocker Buckaroo. And that started my father's career in Hollywood.
Now, one of the things about your father, he seems to have launched great stars in some of their first major pictures.
Well, yes, he did, starting with Gary Cooper in Wings. Gary Cooper had only had one acting job before my father cast him in Wings, and he made such an impression in just one scene in Wings. Then you've got Cagney, who was a supporting player at the time. My father cast him in Public Enemy. Actually switched the roles. Cagney was not originally playing the lead. And my father realized after a few days shooting that he had the wrong actor in the wrong place, and he switched, and Cagney became a major star. Robert Mitchum, who was doing westerns, playing mostly villains, and my father cast him in G.I. Joe, and that was the only Academy Award nomination that Robert Mitchum ever received. So there were many others. Ida Lupino, as far as the women, and he gave very, very important roles to many other actors that launched their careers.
Even later on, James Garner.
James Garner, and that was a picture that I worked on. I had important roles in my father's last 2 films, And in order to do the film that my father really wanted to do, that he called C'est la guerre, the movie was pretty destroyed by Jack Warner at Warner's, and they ended up calling it the Lafayette Escadrille, and it was a very disappointing film for my father. In fact, he quit the business. But in order to do the film, he had to do one picture for Jack Warner, sight unseen. Whatever script he gave him, he had to make it. And he gave him Darby's Rangers. And Warner said, I'll cast the lead and you can cast the other roles. So Warner was talking with Charlton Heston and Burt Lancaster, and Heston at one point said he would do it, and then he said he needed more money and a piece of the profits. And so Jack Warner said to my father, you're going to have to hold up the start of production until I can find another star. And my father said, to heck with it. He wasn't going to wait. So he sent the assistant director down to the back lot where all of the prospective actors who had already been cast, we were going through basic training so that we would be more like soldiers and not like actors. And Jim Garner was down there, and Stuart Whitman and Ed Burns and a bunch of others. And the assistant director got out of the limo and walked up and told the Fort Benning, Georgia drill instructor to form his troops, and he formed us. And the assistant said, Wellman is not going to wait any longer, so we're going to start shooting Monday, and everybody move up one part. Now, I was right there when he said this, and Jim Garner said, well, if I move up, I'm the star of the picture. And the assistant said, that's right, come with me. Wellman wants to talk to you. Stuart Whitman took Garner's role, and there were other people who moved up. Unfortunately, I didn't move up. I stayed the same character I was playing. But that launched Garner's career, really, as a leading man, and soon after that, he was Maverick.
Your father had a relationship with John Wayne, and it really goes back years and years, even back to the beginning of John Wayne's career.
That's true. My father cast him in a picture called Central Airport in, I think it was 1931. And John Wayne had been doing westerns, and he had starred in a western that didn't do any business, and he was back doing small parts and trying to, get moving again. And my father cast him in Central Airport, and Wayne played the co-pilot of a downed aircraft, a commercial airliner that crashed in the ocean. And you see Wayne on the wing of the plane as he's trying to save some of the passengers, and one of them falls into the water, and Wayne dives in to save him, and they both drowned. And it's kind of interesting and a little ironic that some 20-odd years later, Wayne is playing another co-pilot for my father in The High and the Mighty. This time he doesn't jump in the water and he doesn't die. But that was his start with my father, and then my father used him in another picture, College Coach, with Pat O'Brien, and Wayne has a few lines in that one. So they had a nice relationship, but it wasn't until 1953 when my father loved a book that an agent had shown him called Island in the Sky. And my father went to Wayne and said, look, I think you should play the lead, and I'd like to direct it for your company. At that point, Wayne had formed what was called Wayne Fellows, and then it became Bat Jack sometime later. And John Wayne was one of the first stars to break away from the studios and form their own production companies. Burt Lancaster and Kirk Douglas were two others. So my father got started with John Wayne and Island in the Sky, and they did The High and the Mighty, and they did Blood Alley together, and several other films that Wayne did not star in. But they had quite a good relationship.
Island in the Sky is really a very interesting film. You don't see it played a lot right now, but it's a little bit of a different role for John Wayne.
Yeah, it is, because he's kind of becoming he's not the action hero that people were used to seeing him in. He's kind of a patriarch, and the same thing with The High and the Mighty that followed Island in the Sky. Again, not the action hero. And I think those are two of his best performances. Wayne never thought he liked the Island in the Sky, and he liked his work in it. He wasn't so thrilled with The High and the Mighty. Well, actually, he wasn't supposed to play that role anyway. Spencer Tracy was supposed to play it, and at the last minute, Spencer Tracy dropped out, and my father talked John Wayne into coming on board.
Now, I read somewhere that Robert Cummings was also supposed to be in that.
Yes, John Wayne, it was for his company, and John Wayne liked Robert Cummings, who was also a pilot. And he tentatively cast him in the role of the pilot. And my father, it was the only time that my father ever was talked into an actor that he originally didn't want. But William Schifrin, a Hollywood agent, was representing Robert Stack, and he kept after my father to have an interview with Robert Stack, which my father did, but he didn't think he was right for the role. But Schifrin would not give up. He even had helicopters and flying over Warner Brothers studio with banners saying Robert Stack in The High and the Mighty and all this kind of thing. And my father and Schifrin said to Stack, listen, go in again, but don't shave, don't look like, the rich man that you are, look kind of mean and downtrodden. And so Stack went in and bowled my father over, and he cast him, even though Wayne had already wanted Robert Cummings. In fact, when Robert Stack came on the set for the first time, John Wayne walked over to him and he said, "Robert Cummings, I presume." But Stack was wonderful in the film.
Yeah, your father got a great performance out of him. There's no question about it.
Well, he always got good performances out of people. I think that's one of the things that he's noted for. Really strong performances and very realistic performances for men and women.
If you take James Cagney in Public Enemy, Robert Mitchum in The Story of G.I. Joe, those are two of the greatest performances, I think, in cinema history, and that's your father as director.
Yep, I agree. But he got known for being a director of men, and people kind of forgot for a long time, but I think that's been changed now. When you see some of those pre-code films that my father did with, the women in trouble, which was a very important storyline back in the 30s. And my father got terrific performances from people like Barbara Stanwyck and Loretta Young. Look what he did in The High and the Mighty with Jan Sterling and Claire Trevor. They both got nominated for Oscars, and they were not anywhere near first choices. All of the women, the stars of that era, who were old enough to play those roles, turned my father down, and that goes back to people like Barbara Stanwyck and Loretta Young and Dorothy McGuire and Joan Crawford, and they all turned my father down. And Jan Sterling and Clara Trevor took the roles over and both got nominated. So again, my father was a terrific director for actors.
Do you mind if we take a short break and we'll talk a little bit about your acting career?
Of course.
We'll be right back. Welcome back to the Connor's Corner segment of Ask the Lawyer. With me right now is William Wellman, son of the legendary director William Wellman. If somebody in the audience wanted to find out more about your father, how would they do that?
Well, they can go online and or they can read my books. I wrote 2 books on my father, 12 years in the making. The last one, which was 9 years, which is a complete biography of my father's life and times. It's all his pictures, his wives, it's everything. And it's nothing I made up. These are his stories because my father wrote 2 books. One was published and one not. He had started a 3rd book, and he also had written a lot of stories and memoirs and things. So I utilized all of his stories in this book. So it's nothing trumped up. It's my father's stories about his life.
What's the name of the book?
The book is called Wild Bill Wellman, Hollywood Rebel, and it's published by Random House under their Pantheon label. And I've been on book tour. I just finished my 45th book signing event up in San Francisco. So my world is a book tour right now, and the book's doing well.
Are you ever coming to New York to on a book
I've
signing?
been there twice.
You coming again?
Well, I don't know. I pretty well. I did a couple of bookstores. I did a radio show. I did a theater, the Film Forum, in New York City, and I was up in Rochester at the George Eastman House twice, and I was at the Writers Institute in Albany. Then I've been down at the Library of Congress in Culpeper, Virginia, and the AFI Silver Theater in Silver Spring, Maryland. So I've been there. You never know. I might come back if somebody wants me.
I think somebody will want you. We'll work on that later. Now, you started to work as an actor, first a couple of films with your father, but you also did a couple of films with another legendary film director, John Ford.
Yeah, I did. In fact, in, let's see, about 1958, I realized as a working actor that if I was going to be a working actor, I was going to have to do Westerns, because Westerns were all over the air on television and of course movies, and so I had some pictures taken of me in Western garb, and I bought myself a 6-gun, and I was ready to go. And then I started with Have Gun Will Travel, and I ended up doing 16 episodes of television Westerns, plus a couple of miniseries. But anyway, my agent calls me and he says, I got an interview for you with John Ford. And I thought, oh my God, John Ford. So I go on the interview, and I'm trying to get a scene. I figured they're going to have me read a scene, but no, I never got anything. And I arrive at his office, and they send me in, and John Ford is sitting at a big desk, and he's got the chair in front of the desk pushed right up to the desk so that when I sat in it, my knees are touching the desk, and I'm looking right at John Ford. And the only other person in the room is John Lee Mahan, who was the writer, and he was over in the corner pretending like he wasn't in the room. So I'm just sitting there and starting to feel real nervous. No one's saying anything to me, and finally Ford says, do you like horses? And I said, well, yeah, I like horses. So you like horses? Well, yeah, I like horses. My father always had 2 horses on our property, and my sisters and brothers and I, we always rode. He says, oh, you do like horses? I said, well, yeah, I like horses. Okay, you can leave. And I left the room, and I thought, what the hell kind of an interview is this? And I called my agent. I said, that's the worst interview I've ever been on. All he wanted to know was whether I liked horses or not. So about 4 or 5 days later, I get a call from the agent. He says, You're cast in John Ford's The Horse Soldiers. You're a bugler. You got 10 weeks employment. So off I went to Louisiana, and the first time I saw John Ford, when I got on the location, all of the stunt riders and the actors, we all went out to the location in these big buses. And we got out of the buses, and Ford came over to us all, and we were all just kind of in a big group. And he looked us all over, and he said, just want to tell you one thing. There's no actors in this movie. You're all writers. And he turned and walked away. And that's pretty much the way he looked at it. There were no actors, only writers.
Was there a difference in the approach to actors between John Ford and your father?
Oh, yeah. People always told me they were just alike. And since I didn't know John Ford except by his movies, but working with him, he could be very cruel to people, particularly John Wayne and the Horse Soldiers. He liked to, years later I thought that he was doing this to make everybody nervous, because the story of the Horse Soldiers is about a troop, a group of troopers who were behind enemy lines who would never be laughing and singing and doing any, playing any games. So I think he wanted us all to be nervous. So he acted, he was rough on people. And, I didn't want to get anywhere near him because I wanted to last for 10 weeks. And he was rough. My father never treated, he was tough on some actors, but basically he was, he loved his company. He loved all the crew and the actors, and he supported everybody, and he was full of enthusiasm and all. And Ford just kind of acted, I don't know, like he was always somewhere else. I didn't see any similarities in their personalities. Now, the way they shot, John Ford liked to do not a lot of takes, and my father was, his reputation was one take, maybe two, and that's it. He liked the spontaneity of the moment, and Ford liked that too. And I think the way they shot their films there were a lot of similarities. Loving, the master shots, the big shot where all the action takes place in the scene happens in one shot. Neither of them used a lot of close-ups. So there were similarities in the way they shot, but not in their personalities.
Now, you did another film after that with John Ford, Sergeant Rutledge, which was kind of like an historical, it was a breakthrough movie in a lot of respects.
Yeah, well, yes, it was. But for me, probably I shouldn't have done it. I mean, you'd have to look really hard to find me in that picture. I'm actually, since it's a courtroom drama, I'm a sentry, just standing at attention throughout that whole thing. And I was up at the Libero Theater in Santa Barbara doing a play with Charlton Heston called State of the Union. And I was going to be in the next play as well, and I had the lead in the next play, which was a David Belasco play called Rosa the Rancho. And my agent called before we were just finishing State of the Union, and my agent called and said, Ford called, wants you on Sergeant Rutledge. Well, you didn't say no to John Ford. And since you never knew what kind of a role you were going to have, unless you were John Wayne or William Holden, you didn't know. He never even gave scripts out. So you didn't know. So I didn't do the play, and I did the film, and I was on it for like 6-7 weeks, but I had no role really. So I probably would have been better off, except, the thing about being a working actor and having a long career, you have to have people that will continually call for you. See, if you continually do one job for somebody and you don't get recalled by that person, then, it's really hard to have a career. You need those people. I mean, Jerry Lewis hired me in 7 movies. I mean, you need people that will do that, casting directors, producers, and that's how you have a career.
Now, how many films and TV shows were you in?
I did 56 features and 127 television shows and counting.
So if somebody were to ask you, what performance would you like to be remembered for? What performance, outside of the next one, what performance would you point them to?
Well, I don't have a Gone with the Wind, but I have favorites. A picture called Born Losers, if you remember Billy Jack, counterculture hero of the 60s and 70s.
Oh, when I was service, those films played all the time at the service movie theaters.
In Born Losers, and that was the first time I had played a villain, and that film got me a lot of jobs. Another film is Walt Disney's last picture, The Happiest Millionaire, with Fred MacMurray and Greer Garson. And that was, Disney had made Mary Poppins, and then he made Happiest Millionaire, and unfortunately he passed away. And I really enjoyed that film a lot. And I have a good role in it. I did a lot of crazy movies, a lot of beach party movies and voodoo movies, and oh my God. There was a time when I used to tell people that I have had more leads in more bad movies than any actor who can still get a job.
Well, that's a record to be proud of.
I loved, I love to work.
It's a great accomplishment to be a working actor. How many people try to do that and don't make it?
I know. It is tough, and I have to pat myself on the back for that. I mean, I missed, I didn't become Robert Redford, but I loved the work, and I did work a lot.
I have one last question for you. Guys like your father, I know the studio system's gone. John Ford, your father, other great directors of the time. People don't have an opportunity now to direct 40, 50, 60, 70 films like your father.
No, they don't, because it's more of an independent type industry. Even the studios are that way because they don't like. When my father was at Warner Brothers in, let's say, 1930, from 1930 to 1934, he directed 22 films because it was a factory, and they were glamour factories. But you could work, you could do all those films, and they had everybody under contract. They had all the actors, and they had the directors and the writers, and you know, you could do it then. But you can't do that now. Nobody's under contract. People sign contracts for one picture or two pictures or something like that, which makes it more of an independent operation. I mean, my God, when my father was casting his movies at Warner's, all he had to do was call a casting director in, and the casting director would come with this list of stars, and my father would pick whoever was available, whoever he wanted. I mean, the casting director would say, well, let's see, Humphrey Bogart is doing a film, but Cagney's available, Barbara Stanwyck's available. Just go down the list and pick, and you got them. They were under contract. So you had everything you could possibly want. One of the things I love to tell people, at that time, Warner Brothers had a department of people who wrote only titles. That's all they wrote. No stories, they wrote titles. Well, if you think about it, the moguls who ran those studios, they cared about every picture they made. And they might change the title before the picture was released if something happened out in the world, something happened, a headline, something that they might be able to get closer to that. When the picture was released, if it didn't do that well, they would change the title. So they were always looking for titles to spur their commercial success.
Now, even though it was factories, it seemed like a higher percentage of pictures back then were accomplishments of art, maybe more so than today. And I think part of it is guys like your father didn't go to film school.
No, I did a documentary on my father called Wild Bill Hollywood Maverick in 1996, and we had our American premiere at the Sundance Film Festival. And Robert Redford, who we were pals in grammar school, and I had dinner with him one night, and he was talking about this very same thing. And he said the difference is the directors of today are coming out of film school. The directors in your father's era, and John Ford and Howard Hawks and those kinds of people, Victor Fleming, they had life experiences that they brought to their films. And I think that was so true. My father, my God, he lived the life of 100 men, he told me one time.
Now, was he in the French Foreign Legion?
He was for a while. He wanted to get into flying. And the way you could get, first of all, this is 1917. America was not in the war yet. And my father joined an ambulance corps, which got him over to France. And then you had to get in some sort of French service, so it was very easy to get into the Foreign Legion. They'll take anybody. So he transferred into the French Foreign Legion, and that was sort of like, well, let's call it basic training. And then he transferred from there into the Lafayette Flying Corps, and now he was able to fly.
Now, I just wanted to touch upon that because one of the great films your father directed was probably the best, by far and away, Foreign Legion movie, Beau Geste.
Yes, a wonderful, wonderful film. One of my favorite films of my father's.
And again, great performances from Gary Cooper and Ray Milland, among others. Brian Donlevy, probably the best performance of his career.
Yes, well, God, he was nominated for an Oscar. He was terrific, and my father always believed he did. My father didn't really like Brian Donlevy that much, although he used him again in a picture called The Great Man's Lady. But the thing about it was, some of the actors hated Donlevy on Beau Geste, and my father wasn't going to do anything about it because he felt that Donlevy's performance was making everybody else better. So he didn't want to cause any problem. He let Don Levy do his thing. And my God, the performances are great in that picture. That's one of the great adventure films of all time.
There's no question about it. I mean, how many films, made 70, 75 years ago are still being shown today?
Yeah.
And, of course, your father's films are being shown all the time, so he's got a little bit of immortality. I thank you for sharing everything, but please, one more time, give us the name of the book and where we can get it.
The book is called Wild Bill Wellman, Hollywood Rebel, and it's available online, Amazon, bookstores have it. It's pretty easy to find. If you just Google Wild Bill Wellman, Hollywood Rebel, it turns up all over the place. Also, I sell the book on my fan site, and that's easy to get to either. You just my name, WilliamWellmanJr.com. So it's out there.
Thank you for sharing your thoughts about your career and your father's career. Thank you for being on our show.
Well, thank you, Mike. I appreciate it very much, and good luck to you.
Thank you.